Stephen Allen Avery, born July 9, 1962, in Manitowoc County, Wisconsin, is a man whose life has been shaped by a history of legal injustice and controversy. In 1985, at age 22, he was wrongfully convicted of sexual assault and attempted murder of Penny Bearnson. The conviction was based largely on an eyewitness identification and a hair analysis. Avery always maintained his innocence. He had many alibi witnesses placing him far from the crime scene at the time, yet the jury convicted him and sentenced him to 32 years in prison. Over nearly 2 decades, Avery fought to prove his innocence. In 2003, after 18 years in prison, DNA testing ordered through the Wisconsin Innocence Project linked the crime to another convicted felon, Gregory Allen. The DNA evidence excluded Avery and confirmed him as innocent in that case. He was exonerated and released in September 2003. Avery's exoneration led to reforms in Wisconsin, including changes to how eyewitness identifications and criminal evidence are handled. Just 2 years after his release, in 2005, tragedy struck again. Teresa Halbach, a photographer, was last seen when she visited Avery's salvage yard to take photos of a vehicle. Her car, a RAV4, was found on Avery's property days later. Burned bone fragments, Halbach's DNA, Avery's DNA on the car's key and hood latch, and other physical evidence were discovered. Avery and his nephew Brendan Dassey were charged with her murder. The case moved to trial and drew widespread public attention. During the trial in 2007, Avery was convicted of first-degree intentional homicide, illegal possession of a firearm, and related charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Dassey, his nephew, was convicted separately, in part based on a confession that he later recanted, claiming it was coerced. The conviction and the evidence both in the wrongful conviction case and in the Halbach murder continue to be questioned by his supporters. Evidence presented at trial in the Halbach case included DNA matches, blood in Avery's car, bone fragments in a burn pit on his property, and the discovery of Teresa Halbach's key in Avery's bedroom. The state argued that Avery lured Halbach into the salvage yard, killed her, burned her remains, and attempted to destroy evidence. Avery and his defense suggested that some evidence may have been planted or mishandled, and that law enforcement actions were biased against him. Avery's defense pointed to several inconsistencies. For example, the timing of Halbach's arrival, the handling of evidence such as the burn pit and remains, the presence of Avery's DNA in places he claimed he did not go, and the role of his nephew's confession. Brendan Dassey's confession was central, but critics argue it was coerced under pressure, with poor legal representation. After conviction, Avery and his legal team pursued appeals and post-conviction motions. In 2025, he requested a new evidentiary hearing based on new witness testimony and possible third-party involvement. One witness claimed to have seen others pushing Halbach's vehicle toward Avery's yard before it was discovered. Avery's attorneys alleged that some evidence had been planted, including blood, electronics, and the key. However, the Wisconsin Court of Appeals rejected this motion, describing the evidence as speculative and insufficiently supported, and affirmed prior rulings. The case has had significant social and legal impact. Avery's wrongful conviction in 1985 and later exoneration in 2003 triggered changes in Wisconsin's criminal justice system. The Criminal Justice Reform Bill passed in 2005 introduced new guidelines for evidence preservation, eyewitness identification, and handling of criminal investigations. These reforms were aimed at preventing the mistakes that led to Avery's wrongful conviction. Public interest in the case grew dramatically after Netflix released the true crime series, Making a Murderer, in 2015. The series raised questions about law enforcement bias, evidence handling, and whether Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey were treated fairly. Some viewers believe the documentary exposed serious flaws. Others, including prosecutors, claim it omitted evidence pointing against Avery. Brendan Dassey's case also drew attention. At age 16, he confessed during interrogation. Critics and legal advocates argued his confession was coerced. Although appeals in federal courts had some success, ultimately many courts upheld his conviction, finding the confession legally admissible. Dassey remains incarcerated with earliest possibility of parole in 2048. In recent years, Avery has filed multiple appeals, seeking to introduce new evidence or third-party perpetrator theories. Courts have consistently denied these appeals, ruling that the new evidence fails to meet legal standards such as motive, opportunity, and direct connection. The judicial reasoning is that evidence must be more than speculation, and in Avery's case, courts have found that many allegations don't provide enough support under Wisconsin law. The tragic complexity of this story rests not only in its legal outcomes but in its human cost. Avery spent 18 years incarcerated for a crime he did not commit, losing nearly 2 decades of his life, separation from his family, and public stigma. His exoneration came with legal recognition but also a cost in lost time and personal relationships. His wrongful conviction case settlement was modest. Although he filed a civil lawsuit seeking $36 million, the county settled for $400,000 in 2006. Many believe that figure was far below what justice would demand. After he was exonerated, Avery attempted to rebuild his life, owning a salvage yard, reconnecting with family, and navigating public attention. The murder case of Teresa Halbach, however, again led to long years in prison. Avery's supporters argue that law enforcement missteps and possible conflicts of interest due to county involvement compromised the fairness of the investigation. The presence of evidence in multiple locations, some discovered early, others later, has led to ongoing debate over whether every piece was collected, preserved, and presented correctly. Public opinion remains divided. Some believe Avery is guilty and that the evidence supports conviction, while others believe wrongful convictions and planted evidence played a role. The Netflix documentary helped shape widespread concern about the possibility of systemic issues in law enforcement, including misidentification, evidence handling errors, prosecutorial misconduct, and pressure on investigators. Those issues continue to fuel appeals and legal motions. In January 2025, an appeals court denied a new hearing requested by Avery, rejecting allegations of third-party involvement as speculative. The court found that the proposed evidence did not meet legal standards required under Wisconsin law to justify reopening the case. This ruling was another setback for Avery, although legal advocates continue to gather information and push for further review. Stephen Avery remains incarcerated at Fox Lake Correctional Institution, serving life in prison without parole for the Halbach murder conviction. His case continues to be reviewed by legal scholars, advocacy organizations, and the public. Avery has consistently proclaimed his innocence in all convictions post-exoneration. The Avery case has had lasting consequences. It sparked legislative reforms in Wisconsin, including new laws regarding the collection, storage, and testing of DNA evidence, stricter standards for eyewitness identifications, and oversight measures for law enforcement. Legal advocacy groups argue these changes are a step forward, though they say more work is needed to ensure fairness for all accused. Critics caution that even with legal reforms, wrongful convictions remain a risk, especially for marginalized individuals. Issues like confirmation bias, poor investigative practice, misinterpretation of forensic evidence, or coerced confessions remain matters of concern. Avery and Dassey's supporters continue to call for transparent investigations, acknowledgement of possible evidence issues, and sometimes for criminal justice reform. In the end, the story of Stephen Avery is a tragic illustration of both the power and the danger of the criminal system. It shows how a person can be exonerated only to be convicted again, and how public perception, media coverage, and legal decisions intersect in ways that are sometimes unjust. The Avery saga remains unresolved in the eyes of many. Whether justice has been fully served is still deeply contested.